Morning, members. Let me welcome you all back to the PAAC. The membership of the PAAC remains the same as it was for the last fiscal year. So I just want to remember to welcome back all members. I'd like to call this meeting to order, and I would ask Member Norman Dunn to lead us in a word of prayer.
Almighty Father, we thank you for the opportunity to be here today.
You could just turn on your mic. And, sorry. Oh, we weren't hearing. Sorry. Is the light on? I think the members may benefit more.
Almighty Father, we'd like to thank you for the opportunity to be here today. We'd like to thank you for the opportunity to sit and discuss the nation's business. We'd like to thank you for all the persons who have been tasked with the responsibility of each area. And we hope at the end of the day, the discussion will be fruitful and in the interest of Jamaica. Thank you very much. May God bless you.
Thank you.
Amen.
Thank you, Member. All right. Do we have any apologies for absence? No. All right, members, I just want to give a little order of business. I just start by saying that we have some outstanding reports, plus the draft annual report. I'm going to suggest, members, that we review them. We didn't get any comments, but I will take them at the next meeting of the PAC. I don't think we have a rush with regards to that. There is some outstanding work that has to be tidied up. At the end of the financial year, some additional funds were given for the rehabilitation of roads. I suspect with the recent rains, even more so than ever, it is going to be necessary for those funds to all be expended. However, the roads that were to be selected by the Ministries of Economic Growth through the National Works Agencies, and if memory serves me correctly, I think some went to the local government. I'm not certain. But we had indicated that we would ask the ministries to furnish us with lists of the roads that were going to be done, as these would have been left off of the estimates because they're brought up the supplementary budget. So we have asked the clerk to bring those for us at the next meeting of the PAC. There's another outstanding issue that I would like to bring to the attention of members, and it causes me a bit of concern. We had indicated that we had wanted an update from the Ministry of National Security on the matter of the used car vehicles for the police force. The used cars for the police force. And we had asked for an update on it. The Ministry of National Security has sent a letter, and I would like to read the letter to the committee, and then we can determine how we would proceed with it. It is addressed to the clerk, and it says, read the procurement of vehicles to the Jamaica Constabulary Force / contract with O'Brien's International Car Sales and Rental Limited. It says, reference is made to the caption and to your letter dated April the 3rd, 2018. You have asked us to provide information on the following. 1, the status of the contract and efforts to collect the advance payment guarantee. 2, whether additional vehicles have been supplied by O'Brien's International Car Sales and Rentals Limited since the Ministry's last appearance at the PAAC. And 3, if answer to number 2 is in the negative, the action that will be taken by the Ministry to obtain same from the supplier. The questions will be addressed seriatim. 1A, the status of the contract. The contract has been terminated in part in keeping with clause 34 of the contract. As indicated in our previous correspondence, we are taking steps to have the matter addressed in accordance with clause 10 of the special conditions of contract, which are the disagreements or disputes under the contract. In this regard, a letter dated April the 3rd, 2018 was sent from the Attorney General's chambers to Dabdoob and Company, attorneys at law represented O'Brien's International Car Sales and Rental Limited, advising of the Ministry's wishes to proceed with mediation as the first stage in the dispute resolution process outlined under the contract in an attempt to resolve the issue. We await their response. 1B, efforts to collect the advance payment guarantee. In a letter of even date, the Ministry wrote to Patterson Mayor Hamilton, attorneys at law representing Mayberry Investments Limited, the financial institution that issued the advance payment guarantee, requesting that all sums remaining on the advance payment guarantee being paid over to the Ministry. We await their response. 2, whether additional vehicles have been supplied by O'Brien's International Car Sales and Rental Limited since the Ministry's last appearance. Since the Ministry's last appearance at the PAAC, a total of 2 Toyota Hilux pickups were received from O'Brien's International Car Sales and Rental Limited. However, we have not received any accompanying documentation. 3, the action that will be taken by the Ministry to obtain the vehicles from the supplier. In addition to the actions noted above, the Ministry, in a letter dated March 26, 2018, asked the Jamaica Constabulary Forces Fraud Squad to launch an investigation into the matter. We have been informed that a team has been assigned to the case. The Fraud Squad team requested a meeting with the Ministry, and same will be held tomorrow, April the 11th, 2018. The matter has also been reported to MOCA on even date. Owing to the very sensitive stage at which this matter has reached, the Ministry does not wish to prejudice any legal action which may be pursued. Signed, and there's a signature for Dan McIntosh, Permanent Secretary. Members, there are a couple issues that arise. Number one, it appears to me that at this point in time, what we have is that we had been told 30 vehicles had been imported and turned over to the Ministry on the first batch. We had gotten an additional 4, I think, and now we have 2 Toyota Hilux. So, yes?
I think it was 32, Chair, the last time, so this 2 would not make it 34.
Okay.
Stand to be corrected, but my recollection is.
Right. So we need to, I think that's a clarity, but that's where we're at. And of course, the payment had been just over $213 million that had been paid out. Now, why I have a difficulty with this, members, why I have a difficulty is that my understanding along was that there were questions about the mechanism of procurement. There were questions about the approval process, who approved and when. There were questions about who was liable for taxes. And there was a feeling that some of the duties were excessive and some should have been paid by O'Brien's or the ministry. These were disputes. So our understanding, certainly my understanding at the last meeting, was that we were dealing with procedural problems and issues dealing with a dispute resolution, who is right and who is wrong. However, it occurs, this letter indicates to us that the matter has been turned over to the Jamaica Forces Fraud Squad to launch an investigation, and also to MOCA, which to me opens up a whole new arena. And certainly, I would be interested to know when it moved from a issue of dispute to an issue of fraud, and who these would be, who the alleged fraudster would be, who the perpetrators would be. And I think that there is some right on behalf of the Jamaican people, being that this is, all these funds being managed by the ministry are the funds of the people of Jamaica. However, I am mindful of the last sentence that says, owing to the very sensitive stage at which this matter has reached, the ministry does not wish to prejudice any legal action which may be pursued. I thought it important to bring this to the attention of the committee and to ask if the recommendations of how we should move forward with regard to this matter. So, members, I turn it over. Is there any suggestion?
Chairman, the letter in itself gives me a little bit of concern, in that if the contract has in fact been terminated, I don't know what it is that we are going to arbitration with, but be that as it may, it was just a matter of enforcing the provisions against Maybury, who are the holders of the advance payment, who are the issuers of the security. But be that as may, that's, you know, let's just leave that aside for the moment. When we get to the last paragraph with you, I think it may be better that we take that particular issue in camera, so as to allow the ministry's representatives to come and to explain what it is, without the risk of it going into the public arena, which is likely to prejudice.
They have said, owing to the sensitive stage at which the matter has reached, the ministry does not wish to prejudice any legal action which may be pursued. Basically, what they're saying is they would prefer not to come. Are we suggesting as a committee that we should still invite them? However, they should be invited in camera. I don't know, with select members or with the committee in camera, just to ask for some clarification on the process that is being pursued.
Chair, well, there are a few questions that should have been answered that has not yet, because one, the last time that they were here, the ministry, it was said that there was some negotiations being taken place with O'Brien, and there was a settlement on an additional amount, a variation of the contract with the cost of the vehicles. If they had reached to that point, right, now have those monies been paid over to the supplier? Is it that they were going to be used? Why is it then that time frame lapse with those discussions that the cars are still not cleared from the wharf? That's a major question that needs to be answered. Now, the issue with the bond with Maybury, as they have made publicly that they have called in this bond, have they received any response? Why is it that they have not yet received the difference or the full amount as they have asked for? Because I found it strange that they would ask for the full amount for the bond when there are cars that were supplied before and cars sitting on the wharf itself. There's going to be a greater issue of the demurrage to deal with the vehicles also. Who is going to take responsibility for the demurrage of the vehicles and the issue of the payment of that? Is it going to be the Ministry of National Security? Is it going to be the supplier? So if all of these, why is it then, on what issue is it that it went to the fraud squad? Also is a question I would like to know, because it was a coincidence that the day that the minister is now leaving the Ministry of National Security to go to the Ministry of Transport, that this is now being handed over to the fraud squad. What would have gone so badly? What issue that brought it to be a fraud in itself, when we were told that they are in negotiations with the bankers, they are in negotiations with the supplier himself? I think there are a lot of blank spaces to be filled in that need to be answered. I would imagine that the ministry, that last sentence is basically telling you that they're not going to be appearing in front of us because it is now with the police. But, there are still some questions to be answered that we ask that we have not gotten the answer. I think this letter from them is really just a holding point. And not really going into the meat of the matter of what we asked them. I'm not happy with this letter in itself, because there's a lot more out there that needs to be answered by the ministry itself that has been still left unanswered. I think that, if we can get them here to answer these, be it in camera or what, but I think they need to be answered.
Member.
Chairman, I'm concurring with you and with the person representing the permanent secretary, agreeing with the last paragraph or the last set 2 lines of the letter. I think we owe it to our technocrats to do their work, there's so much surrounding this particular issue that if they have asked us that, due to the sensitive nature of the discussion, that we allow them to go through that process. I'm sure they are also interested in the outcome, so we should be mindful of their requests and accede to their requests.
Well,
You're saying you have the right or you have the duty?
You have the right to do so. You must be
don't move. Yes. Members, we're just getting some unsolicited legal advice from the Parliamentary Council, which is very welcome. She has indicated that we do have a right to invite them. However, as indicated, it should be done in Canberra if we do decide to exercise that right. So I just give you the advice as it was given.
Ironically, Mr. Chairman, as an untrained lawyer, that was what I was going to proffer. That it is not.
And I know that Governor Winter is hoping you get no more training. But
no, I was that last sentence, paragraph that my colleague made reference to. I was about to say it is not in the remit of the ministry to determine whether or not they come or don't come. It's the Parliament's prerogative. It is our responsibility to exercise the requisite discretion in how we handle the matters before us. And as was said by my learned colleague from parliamentary colleague, that is not legal colleague, from St. Catherine, is that if the matter is of that sensitivity, then we take them in camera. But the committee ought to be allowed to apprise itself.
Members, I tell you my concern. This matter, which was one of procedures and a dispute over contractual duties, has morphed to the point where it is now a matter before the fraud squad and referred to MOCA. My difficulty with it is that the first paragraph says that the contract has been terminated, despite the discussions with, lawyers. They have applied to have the advance guarantee drawn down, which would be the protection for the people of Jamaica. So we would be happy for that. So basically, those steps we have no problems with. What we do have a problem with is the part where it now becomes the purview of the security forces, fraud squad and MOCA, because that, in a sense, in my mind, supersedes the first two, and everything is going to now sort of stop. Everything is going to be detained while those issues are resolved. And in the interim, we would still be left with 30 plus motor vehicles, no more coming. We don't know what's happening to them on the wharf. In other words, there are real issues that affect the security forces and the people of Jamaica. So the question is how to proceed. I think that what is on the table is whether or not, if we do invite them to clear up these issues, that we do it in camera, or the question of whether or not we should not invite them.
My own inclination, quite frankly, Chairman, is that we bring them here, and in the discourse, if there are any elements of it that they wish to, all because of its sensitivity. Because let's face it, the whole matter, as you have said, has been in the public domain all along. Is the arrangements...
Except for we do not know who it is alleged that this fraud, or where it may
the
have
process
been.
we are concerned with.
This is something, it could be a brands, it could be an internal matter. We have no idea what we're dealing with. Member.
Chairman, thank you. My concern, though, is the long, drawn-out impasse here, because as you know, that there's a statement that says, while nearer fiddles, Rome burns. And we are seeing that the police force is bereft of cars. And how long will this last? What can be done in the interim to beef up the mobility of the police force? I think we need to look at that and to see how best that can be dealt with while we have this impasse.
Which is another line of questioning that would have to, in other words, what are the contingent programs that are being put in place to meet the shortfalls? Because, as I said, we do know that there are some new vehicles that have come, but are we getting the number? We still have to, on behalf, we still have to question national security to ensure that they're getting the requisite resources that are needed. All right, members, I think we have had a fulsome discussion.
Just reminding your chair that there's also a report that is yet to be completed by the Contractor General on this same issue. So I am hoping that that report is soon to an end, which will also help our deliberations.
It would be useful.
Yeah.
It would be useful. So, members, what is the recommendation to? What is our recommendation to the clerk?
I would say to bring them. Our duty is not merely to raise matters, but to see to their resolution.
Yeah. Member Don?
My recommendation, in light of the fact that Member Phillips just said about the Contractor General, is that I think we have, and this particular sentence that says they requested a meeting on April the 11th, that I believe that we should give them time in order to conclude.
That's a month ago, roughly.
Well, I mean, but we don't know the result of that meeting.
Yeah.
But the point is, the Contractor General has indicated an interest based on Member Phillips' comment, and that is yet to be done. As I said earlier, I believe that we should give the our civil servants, our technocrats, the opportunity to do whatever they have asked of us based on the sensitive nature, and then they could report back to us possibly at the next meeting.
Member.
Mr. Chairman, if there are certain interests we have in pursuing this matter, while SMOCA is carrying out its investigation and the fraud squad carrying out its investigation, there's nothing really, technically or otherwise, to stop this committee from hearing. What we are interested in is whether or not we should hear it in camera or outside of camera. That is the only question to be answered.
Well, I think that question was answered by the legal counsel, that it has to be in camera. All right, members, I will inform the clerk that what we will do is to ask them to attend the committee. The meeting will be held in camera. What we will do is to indicate twofold, that within the context they update us on the situation, understanding the sensitivities, but secondly, we would ask them to indicate to us what contingency measures are put in place that we feel national security. I mean, I'm speaking as a person coming from Westmoreland with all the problems I have there. I need to know that we have sufficient resources for the ministry, that the motor vehicles are in place. And therefore, certainly I, on behalf of my constituents, I feel obliged to ask them how they're proceeding with other programs to ensure that they have the resources necessary.
Mr. Chair, that forms part of the concern I have about the in-camera. I fully agree that if in the ministry's judgment there are any particular issues that is of a sensitive nature that may, in their judgment, prejudice the thing, we can defer those for that discussion. But having the ministry before us, there are a number of other things like what you have just mentioned of that we would want to have addressed and does need to be in camera to discuss. So I would respectfully submit to my colleagues that yes, we acknowledge elements of the what is transpiring that are of a sensitive nature, not to be answered by the officers publicly when they appear. But we don't want to deny the committee of dealing with all those other issues relating to the matter, which is ongoing. For example, Chair, you will recall one of the issues we raised in one of the meetings is the performance of the used motor vehicles. And I asked that against him, and she had promised to do an assessment and forward a report to this committee. And why that is of the moment, Chairman, is that I recall the former Minister of National Security indicating that the policy of used vehicle would be continued. And against that background, we must be guided by some empirical data on whether or not it is the country's best use of resources to go along that line. So I really, really want to implore my colleagues, we have a responsibility to the public at large, and we must discharge that. All
right, members, the advice of the legal counsel is that we invite the Ministry of National Security and that the discussions with regards to O'Brien's in its general sense be held in camera, simply because she's not certain what element could be either sub judice or otherwise. So that's number one. That should be held in camera. However, the other elements that you're speaking about, other programs that are going, the wider implications of this can be held outside of camera, but that the issues dealing with O'Brien should be held in camera.
No, could you repeat that last?
That the issues with regards to O'Brien, in its general sense, given the scope of this, should be held in camera so that we can get a full understanding. While the committee can get an understanding, it should be held in confidence. However, the issue of any wider issues, policy implications, those things can be held afterwards, outside, with scrutiny.
I would rather flip it the other way. Do the in-camera discussions after. And I tell you why, Mr. Chair. This committee is the PAAC, Public
Administration
and Appropriation. And the administration element of our remit is the efficiency in administration in the respective portfolio. Mr. Chairman, we have a severe crime situation in the country. It's against that background that the motor vehicles became urgent. That is compounded subsequently, Mr. Chairman, subsequent to the purchase of these motor vehicles, by the declaration of states of emergencies throughout the different parts of the country, and ZOZOs. The motor vehicle and related matters is of the moment. So we can't detach them because one impacts on the other. An instant case in point, you made reference to Westmoreland. I was there with you last Saturday visiting Grange Hill, when one of the problems that they had in Grange Hill was the question of motor vehicle. It directly relates to the subject matter of security, which is this committee's business. So it cannot wait, and it ought to be discussed in its fullness. As I said, I take the point that if there are sensitive matters regarding the transaction with O'Brien that might prejudice a court or judiciary process, that we defer that for in-camera discussion. I'm fine with that. But there's a bigger question, a bigger issue that the subject relates to. So I'd rather we deal with this and we defer those issues to in-camera discussion in the government conference room that we usually use, so that the committee have the benefit of a full discussion.
Mr. Chairman.
No, please. No, Mr. Witt, I have member Dalrymple first. I'm sure you
Thank you very much, Chairman. I apologize for being late. And I came in at the end, but I have read the paragraph 3 of the report of April 10th. And while I agree with my colleague that as a PAC there must be efficiency in matters relating to administration, I know he agrees that that must come secondary to anything that relates to security and how it is going to be dealt with. And if in fact the report says that they have been informed that a team has been assigned to the case and the fraud squad team requested a meeting with the ministry, and the same is to be held tomorrow, which is the 11th of April. No, April, all right, which was to be held on the 11th of April, tomorrow, meaning April gone. I cannot see why it is we are in a rush to have this discussion. Certainly this PAC is never muzzled, and therefore whatever comes out is going to be discussed in the PAC. And I am positive that we are not short of people to bring all the matters into the public forum that is of interest to this country. But I do believe that there is no need for the great haste, because I'm pretty sure that if they come before the court and there are legal matters, the officers are going to say, I'm not at liberty to speak at this time. So since there are so many other urgent matters before us, let us give it the time and let us move on. There is nothing that anybody is trying to hide, because this whole issue with the cars and the Ministry of Security has been an open secret. It has been discussed in all forums. But I do believe that at a time when there are so many other urgent matters, and this matter is being handled by MOCA and the fraud squad, and there are matters being filed in the courts, I think we ought to give it some time before God. That is my opinion. Because if you bring them here, they're going to say, I can't say. So why are we doing that? And we have so many other things. So many other important matters to deal with.
And Mr. Chairman, in support of my colleague's view, this Parliament has always followed the principle of practices and convention, and we have always, whenever an issue comes to the committee, we have always issue that is either before the courts or with the police. It has always been the practice that we rest it aside until those investigations are complete, and I don't think we should move away from that practice.
Members, I've listened clearly, and I think what the issues at hand is that they're twofold. There are two issues. One, as I indicated before, there's the issue of what has morphed from a dispute over contracts into something that seems to have criminal undertones, for it to be referred to fraud squad, etc. As a committee, the implications of that, I think, are important to us as a committee. And there's no doubt in my mind that, given the advice that we have gotten and other advice, that we do have a right to listen to it, but that has to be held in camera. Would have to be held in camera. There are other policy implications, what's being done now, otherwise, which I feel are very important to all of us here, that it's important for us to explore that. Member Jackson, I understand your position where you would want to take it first to the sort of public hearing and go to the in-camera after. I think in my mind the danger of that is that we would not understand where we're sort of infringing on the boundaries. My suggestion to the committee, I think is where we can get some consensus. I think there is a need to have a discussion with the Ministry of National Security. I suggest that we bring them in, have a discussions about O'Brien in camera first. Once we have an understanding, we can also make determinations ourselves as to the sensitivity. Things may have changed in the last month, but I think we have a duty to explore that in camera, and then afterwards I think we can have a discussion on a wider policy matters. And at that point we would be better informed as to what we can and may not speak about, if it pleases the committee.
Yes, Chairman, but when you say you're going to have the discussion, when are you wanting to have this discussion? Because we have no difficulty with that. But what we are talking about is the time factor. We're asking for time before you bring this in, because if you are, then probably as a committee we need to take a vote on it. Because
No,
I
what
strongly
time-
feel.
And what time are you thinking? I mean, I'm just asking, what time are
I
you
don't know,
thinking?
when were you as the chairman planning to set
No, I
the
know you were
meeting?
late, but as I said,
I was late.
I just sort of put it out there because we were having a discussion. I think that we have a duty.
And I agree with you, Chairman, and I am in full support of us discussing this. But what we are thinking, because the matter has been set elsewhere, when are we looking at it? Maybe somebody from the ministry could give us an idea as to when.
Well, but as I said, the difficulty we have is that we have not had we have not been able to have the discussion with the ministry because of the blanket issues. Hence the need to have an in-camera discussion at least
Well then,
with them.
Minister, why don't we write to the ministry? Can we write to them? Because at all costs, I agree with you, we do have the responsibility of looking into this matter. And as my colleague said, there must be efficiency in how we handle these matters.
We had written to them, and this was a response. I think.
Yes, and I think.
And the suggestion was made. I think the suggestion was made that what we have to do is sort of set a date and say we would, because remember, this letter that I'm reading to you is a letter of date. This was sent to us on April the 10th. We are now, today's date is...
We're just at the 9th of May. May 9th.
No, this is the second one. Right,
it's just about a month.
So the
Chairman.
month has passed already. So I'm just saying we are in a position where the time has passed. I think, members, it is really for us to set a date. Do you have a suggestion?
The last sentence of the letter says, owing to the very sensitive stage at which the matter has reached, the ministry does not wish to prejudice any legal action which may be pursued. So based on that, and that is the last sentence there, maybe we could write to them for the final time to say, we note the letter, we are interested in pursuing this matter as members of the PAAC. When can we have the discussion? This last sentence, I think, sets out exactly what it is, how the ministry feels about the matter. And as I said, Chairman, you know that this PAC is open to discussion and putting everything out there in the public, and the government has done so in relation to this matter. But as they have said, and I want to agree, we do not wish to prejudice any legal action. And the truth is, a month is not a great time, you know, in this PAC when we're setting things. We have had matters coming before us of an urgent nature, and we set it for 6 weeks, them come, and somebody is not here, we put it off for another time. It's going to be discussed. But I really think we should engage the ministry to find out if they feel comfortable at this time to bring it, because it's going to have to come here, and we must hear it. It must go out in the court of public opinion what is taking place. But I'm just...
Member Jackson. Yeah, thank you, Member.
Mr. Chair, justice delays, justice denied. Background to this matter is that in the budget of 2016, the government announced that these motor vehicles would have been purchased. The contract for this purchase never happened until January 2017. 2017. We are now in May 2018, and it is all less than about a third of the vehicles delivered from January 2017. How long are we going to keep dragging out this thing? It has been dragged out long enough, and I'm distressed that we who have an oversight committee is going to become partners in this elongated process of resolving a matter which is of national urgency, Mr. Chairman. We as an oversight committee, more than anyone else, should seek to ensure that this matter is resolved with the greatest level of alacrity possible. And I don't need to know writing no ministry. We have been writing, that's another way to delay things. write and wait and let and write. Call them as we usually do.
Chairman.
And tell them that we want them to sit. And if we have to come here and sit as a committee until midnight one night to get this matter resolved, let us do that. That's our duty. Not to get involved and become partners to this elongated process of delays. The consequence of all of this, Mr. Chairman, is the inadequacy of the security forces. We are paying for this delay not only with loss of money,
Chairman,
but we are paying for it with lives.
Chairman, we're going down a certain pathway which I don't. Firstly, and may I just say this: this is not an agenda item, and we have spent an
inordinate amount of time trying to just decide.
Right. So perhaps, may I suggest that what we do is place the matter on the agenda, and we take it at that particular time.
Yes, members, the motion, I did not expect that we would have spent 40 minutes trying to determine a date and a procedure for inviting the Ministry of National Security. But I agree that we have the Ministry of Finance here. So, members, what I will ask you to do is to percolate your thoughts over the next few minutes. Let us take the Ministry of Finance and Public Service, and then at the end of the meeting we can then make a quick determination as to the way forward. All right? So with that, members, 1 second. Yes. Let me apologize to the ministry. We did not expect for the agenda for that discussion to take so long. However, let me, on behalf of the committee, welcome you. As usual, you're the opening bats person for this session of the financial year. What I'm going to do, members, I think, and I think members have gotten their briefs. We have gotten all our briefs and everything. Let us, what I would do, Ms. Morrison, I would allow you to introduce your team as quickly as possible, because we don't really want to detain you despite how it may have seemed in the early part. You can give your opening statement. Governor, I think maybe the best thing to do, members, if you would allow me, is to then just ask the governor to do the same. I'd ask everyone to keep it as brief as possible, and then we would ask Dr. Henry, and then we could just open it out to a sort of broad discussion, the extent to which members would require. But I think a lot of the information is going to be similar, so the extent to which we can just do those. I would ask the members, the officials to be brief. I think members have had the opportunity to look at the reports and allow us then to have a discussion on the areas that we think may be of greater public interest. So I turn it over to you, FS. Welcome again, and you may proceed.
Okay, thank you. Good morning. I'll just introduce the Deputy Financial Secretaries, who are backed up by a couple of other technical staff. So we have the Deputy Financial Secretary for the Public Expenditure Division, Mrs. Loris Jarrett. We have the Deputy Financial Secretary for the Economic Management Division, Ms. Diane Black, and the Deputy Financial Secretary for Public Enterprises Division, Ms. Carolina Connor, and a number of other technical staff. Oh, sorry, I also have the Deputy Financial Secretary for the SHRM, the Strategic Human Resources Management Department, Mr. Wayne Jones. Okay. All right, so we were prepared to just give a short summary of the 2018-19 budget. As would have already been indicated during the budget process, the budget this year, the estimates of expenditure this year included forward expenditure estimates for the years 1920 through 21-22, and this is just to give us an indication of what we would be looking at over the medium term, but this is not for those additional years are not voted, only the current year, 18-19. In terms of the budget for 18-19, the total expenditure approved is $807.1 billion. This is comprised of $773.7 billion that will come from the consolidated fund and $33.4 billion from AIA, appropriations in aid. The consolidated fund amounts includes non-debt expenditure of $484.7 billion and the compensation, which is broken out into compensation of employees of $201 billion, recurrent programs of $222 billion, and capital expenditure of $61.6. The debt service is comprised of $137 billion for interest payments and $152 billion for principal payments, giving us a total debt service of $289 billion. On the recurring side, some of the assumptions that backed up the budget that was approved included an assumption that the government's offer for wages and salaries increases of a 4-year contract, which would reflect increases of 5% in the first year, 2% in the second year, 4% in the third year, and 5% in the fourth year. The assumption was that this would be accepted by all unions and that the first year payments would have been made in 17-18. Therefore, the 18-19 budget reflects only, in addition to that 5% which would have already been paid, the 2% that would be due for this year. The budget also included $4.8 billion for a special early retirement program, which had kicked off from last year, but the expected payouts would have been in this fiscal year, and in fact, this has now happened. There is $2.1 billion that has been provided to support the expanded operations of the Jamaica Defense Force as well inside the recurrent budget. There's a contingency allowance that has been included, which is to cover the repurchase of the Petrodam shares as well as to cover Bank of Jamaica losses. On the capital side, the capital expenditure is programmed to move from 2.4% of GDP in 17-18 to 3% this year, and this represents an $11.5 billion increase over the 17-18 revised estimates. The bulk of the capital expenditure will be reflected under the Ministry of Economic Growth and Creation at 34%. The Ministry of National Security will get 21%, the Ministry of Labor and Social Security 13%, and the Office of the Prime Minister 9%. Of the $20.7 billion, which is to the Ministry of Economic Growth and Job Creation, approximately $16.7 billion is earmarked for infrastructure projects. And this would include the major infrastructure development program, which is ongoing, and the Southern Coastal Highway Improvement Project, which is expected to kick off this year. The Ministry of National Security has received a significant increase over the 17-18 allocation. In fact, the increase is 133%, reflecting $7 billion in nominal figures. This additional funding is expected to contribute to the construction of JDF facilities, to the procurement of equipment, and to the construction and improvement of police stations and other buildings. There are amounts in the capital expenditure that will be financed from appropriations in aid. These are expected to come, the funds are expected to come from the National Health Fund, $2.2 billion to the Ministry of Health. The Universal Service Fund will provide $450 million to the Ministry of Science, Energy and Technology, and the Petrocarib Development Fund will provide $125 million to support the sanitation in schools program. Public debt service, as already indicated, is at $289 billion. It's a reduction on the amount spent for debt service last year. It's a 37% reduction. The reduction is primarily due to lower principal payments, and contributing to that lower principal payment during this year is the fact that we did some liability management actions previously that would have taken out some of the debt that would have become due this year. On the financing side, the revenues and grants are expected at $590.6 billion, or 29.3% of GDP. This is, of course, as usual, comprised of tax revenue, giving you the highest portion at $518.4 billion, non-tax revenue, capital revenue, and grants. The grants figure is up, reflecting expected flows from the European Union, and these are in relation to policy-based support grants for the Justice Sector Reform Program and the accompanying measures for Sugar Protocol countries. Debt financing, we are expecting to borrow $103.2 billion during the year. This is initially indicated at $78.1 billion to come from the domestic market and 25.1 from external markets. The external markets would be primarily the project loans. The self-financed public bodies are expected to attain an overall balance of deficit of $10.4 billion, and this reduced overall balance is predicated primarily on increased capital expenditure by the entities. The bulk of the capital expenditure is expected to come from 4 entities: the National Housing Trust, National Water Commission, Petrojam, and Port Authority of Jamaica. The little detail on those are also provided. Yeah, I think that's basically it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chair. The Jamaica's main macroeconomic indicators, I would like to just give a slightly more updated picture, given that we're now in May and the FPP was presented, or the data that we would have supplied related to would be a little bit dated. The main macroeconomic indicators continue to reflect positive and stable trends. And we see this in the performance and in the outlook for inflation, in the performance and outlook for official foreign reserves, and also for market interest rates. Growth of output, while improving, has remained weak, but employment trends in Jamaica are encouraging. Bank of Jamaica expects to maintain an accommodative monetary policy stance in support of higher levels of economic growth, as long as threats to the inflation target do not emerge. Inflation, the 12-month inflation at March 2018 was 3.9%. That is just below the bank's target of 4.0% to 6.0%. The small underperformance of inflation that this represents for 2017-18, and I know it's a bit odd to, it may seem strange to speak of underperformance of inflation. I think generally we all consider rightly lower inflation to be better than higher inflation. But I'm using that term as we speak, and we will be doing that more and more going forward as as the bank starts to focus its statements about inflation relative to the target that was set. And so it's in that sense that I speak of underperformance. It came in just below. But that slight underperformance was mainly attributed to stronger than anticipated reversal in agricultural food prices in the March quarter. And that compared to or following the impact of reductions in agricultural supplies earlier in the fiscal year. We expect inflation to track close to the lower bound of the inflation target over the next 3 quarters in the context of further reversals in agricultural food prices, meaning declines in agricultural food prices. After that, we expect headline inflation to converge towards the center of the target. Turning to the balance of payments, Jamaica's external accounts deteriorated in the fiscal year 2017-18, but we assess that they have remained and will remain at a sustainable level. In the context of higher global commodity prices, the current account deficit on the balance of payments for the fiscal year 2017-18 is estimated to have deteriorated to 5.3% of GDP compared to 2.6% of GDP in the preceding fiscal year. The net international reserves have continued to strengthen. At March 2018, the 31st of March, we were holding $3.1 billion in the NIR, and that compared to $2.8 billion at 31st of March 2017. Gross reserves at that date, 31st of March 2018, amounted to $3.7 billion and are targeted to exceed the measure of reserve adequacy by the end of the current agreement with the IMF. The government has maintained its commitment to the maintenance of a flexible exchange rate system. And in the context of the reforms that we made to the foreign exchange market, the exchange rate in the fiscal year 17-18 reflected more normal two-way movements. And I say more normal being more like normal flexible currencies. I don't mean Jamaica's normality, because that compares with our history where the rate moved mostly in one direction. At the close of 17-18, the exchange rate against the US dollar was 125.98, and that represented a year-on-year appreciation or strengthening of the currency of 2.1%. This compares to an annual depreciation or weakening of 5.4% in the previous fiscal year. The experience of two-way movements has continued in the new year. At 27th of April 2018, the exchange rate was 125.53, representing an annual year-on-year appreciation or strengthening of 2.8%. At the bank, we continue to improve the way that we conduct foreign exchange transactions with authorized dealers and cambios. We had successfully introduced, you'd recall, Chair, the sale operations of the B-Fix-It mechanism, the competitive auctions by which we were selling. We successfully introduced that last year. People have become accustomed to it. It has been working well. We have then moved to introduce the buy side, where we buy foreign exchange from the authorized dealers and cambios, and we introduced that in April this year. We've had 4 auctions so far, four operations, and they have all gone well. And so this has been a good, smooth start, and we expect that to, well, we are hoping that that will continue, and we think it will. We also began the process of reducing the amount that authorized dealers and cambios are required to sell to the central bank from their daily purchases of foreign exchange, what is known as the surrender requirements. Since October last year, we have reduced those requirements on 2 occasions by a cumulative 10 percentage points. That has brought the surrender requirement to today 20% for authorized dealers and 15% for cambios of their daily gross purchases. Just to give a sense of the quantities, Chair, that change of 10 percentage points is equivalent to about $60 million per month that the bank was buying through this mechanism, and that it is no longer buying, and that has been available in the market. Turning to market interest rates, money, and the private sector credit, in the context of the monetary policy stance that I have described, market-determined interest rates have also declined to historic lows. In the April 2018 auction, the yields on the 3-month, the 91-day and the 182-day Treasury bills declined to historic lows of 2.82% and 2.98% respectively. Lending rates in the banking system have also been falling, but at a slower rate. The most recently available data indicate reasonable growth in the volume of financing that is being accessed by the Jamaican private sector. Total private sector financing, which includes credit extended by deposit-taking institutions, bank loans, to the private sector, but it also including corporate bond issues. These things we hear about are sometimes referred to as exempt distributions, where corporate entities essentially borrow funds directly from investors through a bond issue. Taking those together, total private sector financing expanded by 19.7% at December 2017, a faster rate compared with growth of 12.4% at December 2016. In real terms, the growth in private sector financing it was 13.7% compared to the 10.5% the year before. Chair, lastly, just a word on loan quality in the banking system. That has continued to improve. At the end of February 2018, the ratio of non-performing loans to total loans in the banking system was 2.6%, down from 2.8% a year earlier. And you would recall perhaps that this has been a trend coming down from the highs of a few years ago. Also, banks in the banking system remain adequately capitalized. I'll stop there, Chair. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Good morning, Chair and members. I have with me from the Planning Institute of Jamaica, to my left, Mrs. Rochelle White, Senior Advisor in the Director General's Office. Beside her, Mr. James Stewart, who is the Director of Economic Planning and Research Division. And beside him, Ms. Nyasha Garraway, who is a manager in the EPRD. And we have also our Chief Modeler, Mr. Hugh Morris, He's in the Economic Planning and Research Division. If you don't see him here, he'd be on a runway somewhere modeling. It's a bad joke. As we heard, for the fiscal year 2017-18, the Jamaica's economy is expected to grow by 0.9%, and that would represent the 5th consecutive fiscal year of growth. And it reflects an estimated expansion in both the goods producing and services industries. The fiscal year growth outturn is predicated on the combined effect of actual real GDP growth for the first 3 quarters of the fiscal year. That's the April to June 2017. We saw the decline because of adverse weather. We saw a pickup of 0.8% growth in July to September 2017. And in October to December, we had 1.1% growth. And that's reported by Statin. And we combine that with our projection for the January to March 2018 quarter of 1.7% growth. Note that data is still coming in currently, so we'll have our final forecast for the January to March quarter, and we'll report to the country in another few weeks. Growth for the fiscal year that just ended in March is largely reflected improved outturn, as you heard, in key macroeconomic variables. We had higher levels of employment. We had an uptick in industrial production. There was improved real sector performance, boosted mainly by the reopening of the Alpart alumina refinery, as well as the plant expansion and increased capacity utilization. And there was also strong growth in tourist arrivals. However, growth was stymied by the impact of heavy rains and flooding during the fiscal year, which hampered production in some industries, particularly agriculture, forestry and fishing, mining and quarrying, and electricity and water supply. The main contributors to growth, the outturn, was mining and quarrying, is expected to grow by 5.8%. Hotels and restaurants is projected to grow by 4.7%. And the agriculture, forestry and fishing is projected to decline by 2.3%, largely reflecting the impact of adverse weather during the fiscal year, resulting in what we've seen. And we had a decline in other agricultural crops and animal farming components, as the traditional export crops component recorded growth. And growth is projected in the sector for January to March. For fiscal year 2018-19, this current fiscal year, we project that the economy will grow within the range of 2% to 3%. And this improved growth performance is predicated on an overall improvement in macroeconomic conditions, underpinned by sound fiscal and monetary policies. And the improved conditions include increased domestic demand, stemming from increases in consumer and business confidence, higher levels of employment. And this is expected to drive real sector activity, particularly in construction, manufacture, and agricultural industries. We expect stronger growth in the global economy, which is projected to grow by 3.9%. In particular, the improvement in the economies of Jamaica's main trading partners is expected to result in a strengthening of demand for some Jamaican goods and services. The industries expected to drive growth during this current fiscal year are mining and quarrying, and that's predicated on expansion of productive activities at the Alpart alumina refinery, consequent on the utilization of increased capacity and the commissioning of a second digester. We expect production at Alpart that was plagued by setbacks in fiscal year 17-18 due to technical problems associated with the reopening of the plant. We expect those to be ameliorated, and we expect a lot of the issues that were addressed over the last fiscal year in terms of these technical challenges to be overcome. And we expect growth in excess of 20% in the mining and quarrying industry, which is projected. Hotels and restaurants, we expect increased stopover arrivals facilitated by a greater number of hotel rooms, increased flight frequency, increased load factors, and new flights. The agriculture, forestry, and fishing industry is expected to rebound following the adverse impact of weather-related shocks during 2017. And the construction industry It's supported by increased activities in both components of the industry, that's namely building construction and other construction. Building construction is expected to be pushed by increased residential construction activities, as well as the construction of hotels and other commercial buildings. It is anticipated that the other construction component will be influenced by road rehabilitation and construction works, including Barbican Road, Constant Spring Road, Mandela Highway, and the Southern Coastal Highway Improvement Project. Other construction activities include the construction of the new 190 megawatt plant by JPSCO, costing US $330 million, which commenced during 2018 and is slated to be commissioned by mid-2019, as well as port-related improvements and developments, including the upgrade of the Reynolds Pier and the Montego Pier Cruise and Cargo Development Project, with a combined budget of approximately $3.3 billion. Quickly in terms of what we call our upside potential, we can have additional growth impetus that could come from stronger than expected external demand, especially within the tourism and other export-driven sectors. We can have stronger than projected domestic demand associated with increased employment. We can have higher than expected capacity utilization at production plants, especially within the mining and quarrying and manufacturing industries. We have what we call also downside risks, whereby growth may be constrained by weather-related shocks that may adversely impact productive activity. It can be constrained by plant downtime associated with relatively aged equipment. It can be constrained by slower than expected growth in the economies of our main trading partners, as well as crime and violence as a potential deterrent to investment and productivity. There is also the potential fallout in mining and quarrying industry consequent on the US sanctions on selected Russian oligarchs, what we are seeing in the news. The developments are ongoing. We know that the effective date of sanctions has been postponed, as announced, until October 2018. We know stakeholder deliberations continue to mitigate any possible negative impact of the sanctions on the industry and the economy. And so we continue to watch those. Let me speak quickly on the labor market. Labor market conditions continue to improve, as indicated by the labor force survey undertaken by Statin. The latest data released as at January 2018 indicated a trend of increased number of persons employed and a continued increasing trend in the number of persons employed, as well as a fall in the unemployment rate. As at January 2018, the employed labor force increased by some 22,600 persons to 1.206 million relative to January 2017. And when disaggregated by sex, the analysis revealed that the number of employed females rose by 20,700 persons to 542,400, while the number of employed males rose by 1,900 to 664,200 persons. An examination of the employed labor force by industry group revealed that 10 of the 16 industries recorded increased employment relative to January 2017. And the largest increases were recorded in wholesale and retail, repair of motor vehicle and equipment, construction, hotels and restaurant services. And the industry group that registered the largest decline was transport, storage, and communication. The unemployment rate as of January 2018 stood at 9.6%, which was 3.1 percentage points lower than the rate in January 2017, and represented the lowest unemployment rate since 9.3% was recorded in October 2007. The decrease relative to January 2017 reflected declines in both the female unemployment rate, which stood at 12.1%, down 4.9 percentage points, and the male unemployment rate, which was 7.5%, down 1.5 percentage points. The youth unemployment rate, which is a cohort age 14 to 24 years, fell 7.4 percentage points to 23.8%. And the decline was reflected declines in general female youth unemployment, which rate fell to 27.9%, and male unemployment, male youth unemployment, which fell to 20.4%. So let me stop there in terms of real sector and labor market developments.
I'm sorry, Chair, I had omitted to introduce my colleagues, and I wondered if I might, with your permission.
Go ahead, absolutely.
Yes, so I'm accompanied by Senior Deputy Governor John Robinson, as well as Deputy Governor Wayne Robinson, who is responsible for the Research and Economic Programming Division and Financial Stability at the bank. Also with us behind him is Mr. Robert Stennett, who is the Division Chief for the Research and Economic Programming Division, and to his left is Mr. Andre Murray, who is a senior analyst in my office working with me. Thank you.
All right, let me just start, just for some clarity. Let me just start the ball rolling, and then I'll open it up to my colleagues. But Dr. Henry, just a question. For financial year 16-17, what was the actual growth?
Financial year, the table is here. For 16-17 was 1.3%.
Yes. All right, and we had and the projection at the start of the year
for 16-17
was 1.6, or it had, or was it higher, and then we had downed it a bit at the fiscal, I think so, to 1.6.
Yes, yes.
I think it was supposed to be 2, and then we went. I'm not certain, but I do know we ended up at a figure of 1.6, and we ended up at 1.3. And last year we had projected 2.3.
Yes.
And the outturn last year is
for 17-18 is projected at 0.9.
At 0.9.
Yes.
So the question, and this year we are between 2 and 3.
Yes.
Why? I think as a committee, you know, we keep getting the projections, but we're often, I mean, we're sometimes we're off and sometimes we're way off. Yes. And unfortunately, we're never way off in the right direction. It's always in the wrong direction. Sure. Why do you feel this year that we would do better than we did in the past with the projection?
So thank you for the question, Chairman. And what we normally give the forecast of growth and predicated by the conditions as we observe and as they are expected to materialize. And so as we give a 2 to 3% growth forecast based on the growth we are seeing in the certain sectors, based on the general macroeconomic conditions, both domestic and local and internationally. And so there are a number of factors going into what informs our forecast. When we've had to revise, we've also had, we've been clear as to the conditions that would have caused and led to those downward revisions. And it would be similar to what you would see in terms of global growth forecasts. And remember when we had the 08 crisis, international crisis, and they were anticipating recovery, but you had what they call a multi-speed recovery, some countries recovering, some not, and those countries are expected to drive the recovery and to spur the global economy. It didn't materialize. And so you saw a number of revisions downward as forecasts were revised based on the conditions as they materialized. And so in our case in Jamaica, we've been very vulnerable, particularly to vagaries of adverse weather. And last year we'd have seen what happened to some of our neighbors in the region and the devastation that took place. We were spared those impacts. Nonetheless, we were impacted ourselves. We reported, you will recall, to this committee and to the country that based on the adverse weather rainfall, that sustained rainfall that had significant flooding and infrastructure damage through the March to June period. And we're just saying out of 4 months of heavy rainfall, we had estimated $4 billion Jamaican dollars of damage. That's what we could estimate in terms of assess, which was some 0.2% of 2016 GDP. And that highlights the vulnerability of the country. And when it happens, we think immediately of the agriculture, forestry, and fishing industry because of the lost production in the ground. But you also had a lot of mining plant downtime because of the rainfall. You had a lot of construction activities that were halted because of the sustained rainfall. And it speaks to the priority that's afforded now and has been for some time as a country ourselves to strengthen our resilience to these climate impacts. So, and I'm careful to add, I think that once, international rating agencies, investors, people who track Jamaica, you don't see a response when the growth is downgraded in terms of revised down based on the conditions that led to the downgrade, if you understand what I'm saying. So it's factored in that we're saying because of adverse weather, the impact has been such and we've had to revise downward, and those things are factored in by the market, if I can use a term to say, and so it's important that we continue to build resilience, the types of efforts we are seeing now, attention being brought to climate smart agriculture, efforts to improve drainage. We saw the recent Building Act being passed to lead to enhancements in the building code, and it's really a regional imperative, not just for the Caribbean region, of course, for all those small island states that are equally vulnerable. We've had those discussions with the multilaterals to say, even though we are classified as middle income, we are still as vulnerable as countries who don't have the income levels we have. So those are the concerns. So thank you for the question and the opportunity to explain.
Yeah, before, I was looking for it. What's the projection, for example? You have here agriculture, forestry, and fishing expected to rebound following the adverse impact of weather-related shocks during 2017. So do you do that by quarter? So you would expect agriculture to grow this quarter by a certain amount?
Yes.
I say that because we are now in, May?
Yes.
And I mean, it was a lot of rain that fall.
Yes.
So the question is, how much do you expect agriculture to grow this quarter, for example?
So as we had anticipated for the current fiscal, a 5% increase in the sector. No, at 7%. Once the
repeat that, sir?
All right, so we had originally anticipated 7% rebound and increase in the sector, but we are now down at 5%, revising down.
As of Sunday?
No.
Rain. No, the reason I say
yes.
is that, look, we do have to have our projections, but I'm just saying as a committee, and this is really meant just for us to have a better idea of how we project ourselves. Yes. It seems as if every year we seem to make the same miscalculations. And I simply say, for example, and
sure,
that having projected 7% growth with what has happened this weekend, I have no doubt that is going to have an impact, certainly on my farmers. That has had already a big impact. So I have a suspicion that for the first quarter of this financial year, already we may be looking to down that 7 or 5% even further. So I'm just saying, within the context of it, has there been any thought
in
so doing
thank
things
you.
in a little more, especially those sectors where it seems to be a habitual problem?
Sure, so thank you again. And so just to clarify, these are not miscalculations. When what we project, if what we project doesn't materialize, it's not a miscalculation. We would revise, because these are continued observations and assessments and forecasts. We give our forecasts based on what we anticipate in terms of what we have materially in terms of the projections and the actual activity as planned. We mention, and we are always careful to mention, the upside potential and the downside risks. That says you can, having made a forecast based on what we have, our best assessment now at this point, even looking forward, as occurrences happen, adverse weather, the global economic conditions can be more favorable or less. You can have, many disruptions in a negative way, or you can have accelerators in terms of positive events that may happen. As those materialize, we will revisit these forecasts, and so that's what we do. So as we forecast, thankfully, while we weren't directly hit in the extent of a damage of 200% GDP. Even if you were to forecast and that happened, your best forecast wouldn't have, right? So we continue to recognize the risk, and it's a very clear and present risk and danger, an exposure to the country, and we continue to encourage what we call the climate resilience initiatives to build or mitigate against these. So and so what for businesses to plan, for private sector, for the government to plan and budgets to be prepared, we give our forecasts based on these assessments, recognizing that somebody asked recently, well, why can't you factor in the hurricane to downgrade your forecast if it always comes? Well, no, it's dependent on the extent and magnitude, frequency, etc.
I understand. I was really saying it in a sense that we tend to, or we seem to be having similar problems
year over year.
So even in the calculation, one would think. And,
how do you?
And just a second, brief follow-up.
Yes.
Is the extent to which now you have this event, like this heavy rain, the floods are going to cause a lot of crops to go out. So I suspect in 3 months, 4 months, I don't know, you're going to have a situation where you're going to have some shortage. Prices are going to go up. You're going to have an effect on inflation. Do you immediately get into sort of look at the revisions, projecting it, or do we just wait till July, August, September, and then now we're like, okay, and the effects are there? Or is it that you have an event and you immediately trip in now and say, okay, I need to alter my projections today?
So once the event closes, in terms of we do an assessment, what they call of damage and loss, with other agencies along with the PIUJ to assess the extent of the damage, and then we'd incorporate into our forecasting numbers. And I think that's key. So the concern you would have is valid, which is a similar issue with why financing in agriculture may be difficult for those stakeholders, because people realize the risk and susceptibility of the sector to these conditions. And in the same way, as a country, we are vulnerable, so that same concern, that same risk factor comes in. And it may not mean now that the farmer will still plan his output based on acreage and production, and so understanding that he is or she is subject to the risk of adverse weather, but they still have a forecasted plan of output and production. And in the same way, we aggregate as an economy all economic activities, goods and services, to have what we call the GDP, and we have a forecast of what that should be for the year or for the period we are forecasting, and that is subject to the risks of these exogenous factors.
Okay, members, I have Member Stewart, Member Dunn, Member Phillips, all right, and Member Jackson, all right?
Thank you, Chairman. Through you to the Governor, my question has to do with the oil. What is the reasoning behind the assumption that we're looking at a $56 per barrel for oil? This morning we saw where it went up to $71. There is no hedging. What is there to cushion the country as relates to the fluctuation in the price?
Thank you very much. The $56 was reflected our projections in January, and essentially that was pretty much the consensus, or close to the consensus forecast at the time. Things have changed, and oil is notoriously volatile. And as you point out, we're now seeing higher oil prices, and have been for a few months. So at this point, we see a higher average oil price, following the similar discussion that the chairman had on the other sectors. We keep reevaluating these numbers, and they get built into the new forecasts. At the moment, we are now projecting an average oil price for the fiscal year at $67.20. So that's quite a significant increase.
Yeah.
Oil will have gone up.
Could you repeat that? The projection for this year originally was at $56?
Yes.
And you now have revised that to
$67.20.
That would be what?
The increase, the increase relative to the previous year is now 25%. Oil price would have risen by 25%. So that is significant. We have been seeing these kinds of rises over the last few years. Recall that oil not too long ago was down at around $30 a barrel. All of those have been absorbed in Jamaica without any major inflation.
And you're not contemplating any hedging?
Well, the Bank of Jamaica would not be hedging. That would be the minister.
I thought you were head of the hedging committee at the time. So
I wasn't actually, but that has been repeated a few times. But I was very much involved and very much engaged. So substantively,
not at this time, not contemplating.
I think that I would say that that's an issue that the financial secretary and the government would handle. Bank of Jamaica has been engaged and was and will be. Since we can present technical capacities and so on that can assist with it, but it is fundamentally a fiscal question in terms of hedging. I would like to say, though, that, I mean, as I said, that's to buy a hedge contract or not, to spend money on it and to protect revenues, etc., belongs there, and as it was in the past, and it would be so in the future. But I would make one point, that in terms of thinking about the protection for the overall economy, or the buffers that allow the economy to be able to weather any sharp change in the oil price, and this change is not what I would not include in that. Big as it is, this is not the shock that we have to be worried about. It's when it goes much more and it does it suddenly and stays there. We haven't seen that yet. The geopolitical situation in the world, the various things we've all been seeing on the front lines, have a lot to do with what's going to happen with the oil price, and we watch that with it remains an important risk to all projections, and indeed a risk to Jamaica's own economic livelihood, its welfare. From a macro point of view, we want to be sure that if and when there is a sudden shock that suddenly changes how much the country has to pay to continue to carry through, for the economy to continue even with a much higher oil price, how can the government manage that? How can the country manage it? Not the government, but everybody. That's where having adequate foreign reserves is really important. So I mentioned earlier, Chair, that we are expecting to reach what we call reserve adequacy. We're not quite there yet. That's the 3.7 billion or so of reserves. Gross reserves needs to get up into the 4.5 billion range. But importantly, in this current program, a key value of the precautionary quantity that is available to be drawn of 1.6 billion is that we have the means to supplement that 3.7 with the 1.6. Well, it accumulates as we go through the various test dates to give us that buffer during the program. So from a macro point of view, being able to weather sudden shocks to the oil price that impact balance of payments, we have that, I think, well covered at a reasonable cost.
Yeah, but
yes.
But I just say, just from a point of, and just following on, just from a point of understanding, and I don't know who could best answer, but it seems to me already that right now that gas prices will be almost at our pump prices will be almost at the highest that they've ever been because of the new taxes that were put on it recently. So I find that the prices, even when we were at a higher barrel, that the prices now seem to be very high. and this move, if we're up 25% over last year, that must have an effect on internal movement and growth and costs. Are those things factored in?
Yes, but I would say that one of the interesting things about the oil price, recall that it had fallen quite significantly. Very significantly, from the $80 to $100 barrel range down to the 30s, 40s, and sometimes below. And one of the things that we noticed, and we have been reviewing it, PIOJ and others, the IMF as well, it's a surprisingly limited impact on growth. That there should have been a very big positive impact on growth, and there wasn't. And I think that there's something there to review in terms of the impact on growth. But certainly the other variables that you mentioned, like the balance of payments, inflation, other key variables, it absolutely does have an impact, and that's why we have to treat it with a lot of concern. The only other thing I would say, Chair, if I could, is that the 25% increase, it's not something that's just suddenly happened. We're really...
So it's a process.
It has already happened.
Oh, no, I thought you said that. No. I thought you said that it was projected, it moved from 56.
Yes.
In January was a prediction, to now to 67.
Yes. So I just
and you had said, yes, that's about a 13, 14%.
Well,
no, but
if I may clarify.
You then said that in itself wasn't significant. However, over last year, it is a 25% increase. So that's
yes. So the point I wanted to make, just to make sure I'm clear about it, we're talking here about the average daily price of oil for the fiscal year that we're in now, the projection for it. That's what I'm speaking to. So the number that's built in here is $56 a barrel. That was the forecast that we provided to the ministry to include in the budget in January.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm saying that number, revised number now, if we use a forecast now, is $67 a barrel. And that's 25% higher than what the average was for last year.
Yeah, but that's the point I was making.
Right. So the point I was just making was to say that, yes, it is significant. Just to be clear, it's not a trivial increase. But I just wanted to get across that it's not that we've just had an increase in that oil price. What's happened is that those higher prices in the 60, 65, 67, we've been seeing those for several months now. The issue is that the projection for the whole fiscal year, which saw that price tapering back off, has changed now to staying up at this level. So I just wanted to be clear so that I don't want us to leave the discussion thinking that there's some jump in the price of oil that people should now expect. It's about the projections.
Yes, I understand.
Thank you.
Member Dunn.
Thank you very much. And
sorry, you had finished, Member Dunn. Okay.
Thank you very much, Chairman, and thank you all on that side for the service to Jamaica and your stewardship at your various different agencies. I'd like to make two comments and a question. When I listened to Dr. Henry's presentation, I mean, it's music to my ears because in most cases, what you spoke about would normally be heading in the other direction. So which means that we're actually heading as a country in the right direction based on what you have said. But the question is really for Governor Winter. With all the changes that has happened with BOJ and the regulations, you mentioned about the 60 million changes because of the difference in what is required now to be submitted from what not to be required to be submitted. Why is it that interest rate remain that sticky? That's the question. Why?
So, I mean, are you, if I may, referring to the borrowing rate or the lending rate for banks to particular sectors? Okay, so what we've been seeing is that generally interest rates have been falling. So that you're seeing, if you're an investor and you want to get, you might have got a return. Just in May last year, if you bought a Government of Jamaica bond, you could get one, you got one at 11%. May last year. It's impossible for you to get that rate today if you're an investor. The rate that you're going to get, the recently auctioned 3-year bond, just 2 weeks ago was 4.3%. And we'll see how that goes. We expect that to continue. That means that if you are a private issuer of bonds, a corporation, you're seeing that as well, in that you are now borrowing at rates. In fact, they have been borrowing at rates below 10, below 9, below 8 during this last year. That's well below what it was before. So those rates have come down. The rate that I think you are talking about, I believe, would be this rate. We report the average of the lending rates of the banks, which includes sort of all the loans on their books. That's very sticky in part because it's an average of everything, as opposed to an average of new credit. Okay, so that's something to keep in mind. So averages go down more slowly than marginal prices. A comparison would be that with the rate drop that I just mentioned of the government bonds, when you look at the interest cost to the government in the budget, interest to GDP, it doesn't reflect such a dramatic fall because the books are still carrying the interest on all the bonds from previous periods. So that's just a factor to consider. But I still agree that it's still too sticky, that in fact, I believe that lending rates by the banks, by the banking industry, could fall faster. And so the challenge that we've all acknowledged here, and I think you're questioning me about that, is how do you ensure that that's accelerated so that it is so that the benefit flows through to, and I think the particular concern is to the small and the medium-sized businesses. Just so to be clear, large corporate businesses, large borrowers, the government, they're enjoying much lower rates, and we expect that to continue to decline. And that's a very good thing indeed. The challenge is how to get it through to the small and the medium size. And on that score, Chair, there are a number of projects, actions being taken under the National Financial Inclusion Strategy that DBJ would be better posed to speak to, that try to find ways to assist the targeted segment so that credit will flow and at better terms to them. And there's much debate about those issues. My job, I think, and what I want to share with the committee is that, is to look for the ways that the system overall can get more efficient and that those spreads can narrow. I would say at the moment that bank spreads are under intense pressure, as they should be. The direction is downward. And as the accommodative monetary policy framework continues in the context of the fiscal strength that you've been discussing here in the FPC, it's a question of having not having a bank or two or three start to really try to lend and push credit out. It's about moving all the banks there, because already you have banks that are pushing their credit as fast as possible, but you have others that, for various reasons, aren't moving it out as much. And I think the interest rate has something to do with that.
Thank you, Dr.
So could this be, one of the confounding factor in the economy right now, with all the macroeconomic variables being positive, we're just not getting the growth any at all. So could this stickiness in the interest rate be a contributing factor, especially when you look at agriculture, which is a large component of this particular spread, and for us to be climate resilient? The fact that if money is not being lent to places like those that contribute significantly to the growth process, would that therefore be reasonable to say that the stickiness is what is one of the factors that might contribute to the anemic growth?
My view is that that's not the case, and I'll tell you why. I think it's a hypothesis that does bear intense discussion and debate, but my view is that it's not, because the volume of growth we're talking about is going to be generated by this stronger credit expansion on the part of these larger entities, including in these larger entities. But it's vital that we nevertheless get that rate down, because I think what it does affect, it's going to affect is the sustainability and the equity of the growth process. Because we're getting cheap credit for large corporations, which is where the larger projects and the larger activities and the larger GDP will happen. But you cannot grow an economy sustainably, or at least we believe you can't, I believe you can't, on that alone. It's important that it's actually, that growth thrust is spread across smaller and medium-sized enterprises. That's where you get the innovation, the dynamism, and the opportunity that I think will be important for Jamaica's growth. So I believe that we must get that rate down, but I don't think that at the moment, or rather if you do, I don't think you should be expecting some big change to the growth number in the near term. But what it will change is the sustainability of that growth path and elevate it over the medium term, which is our goal, that we have sustainable growth. I agree that my remarks are debatable, and I would want to offer it in that context for discussion. And if I could add, Chairman, interest rates are important, but when you're dealing with the smallest enterprises, and we're looking at that more and more, what you're finding is that they're not dealing with an interest rate of 15 versus 10 as the threshold problem. I mean, obviously that is better to get 10 versus 15. But if you've got people who are dealing with 30% and 40% at the small end, okay, that's not resolved by a macroeconomic change, okay? It's resolved by us focusing on what are the ways to empower the flow of capital to those segments. And that's why I would say, Chair, that a greater engagement and exposure to the National Financial Inclusion Strategy and the various components in it is important, because that's how we will, it's through those mechanisms that the government seeks to tackle those questions. And I think we can make more progress than we've made so far with pursuing those objectives in the way that we're doing it and getting some successes. And I think it's urgent to do so.
Okay, Dr. Dunn, okay. Member Phillips?
Thank you, Chairman. To Dr. Henry, back to agriculture. And we, coming from the conversation you're having with the chairman on the projections, and I think in your opening remarks, when we're talking about inflation and the downward trajectory of inflation because of the reduction in food prices. And I sat here thinking that even though we may have the reduction in food prices, there's somebody who gets hurt at some point in the food chain. And I was speaking to my colleagues here, because my constituency is based on just farming, nothing else. But then the dependency on growth within the economy on agriculture, and do we judge those forecasts on also not only the weather, but also on policy from the government of the day? Because if we don't, then we're always going to be off the target itself. Because weather, yes, is a factor, and I laugh when I hear of the downward numbers in agriculture in the last financial year, and we had flooding, yes, but Manchester and St. Elizabeth was somewhat spared by the flooding, and those are the two large agricultural belts. And I come back to government policy, because it is beyond me on why it was that even the agri-parks, Agro-Invest, was moved from the Ministry of Agriculture and carried to the Ministry of Economic Growth. Thank God it has now been brought back to the Ministry of Agriculture. But if you look at the sustainability of the agri-parks also, there has been a downturn. I mean, we got to the point of where we were not importing Irish potato to importing Irish potato. We got to the point of increased production in onions, where we have seen a fall off in that. We, through RADA, and I think part of our weakness in agriculture is that we have little or no research. The infrastructure itself, I mean, my constituency that depends on agriculture only has 30% water running through it. 30%. We still have to wait on rainfall. If you look at what is happening now with even Irish potato, and I can talk about that because we have just, farmers have just finished planting and this rain is going to affect it. But when you have one extension officer to 3,000-4,000 farmers, there's no way that you can plan and you can help to guide the production levels. Right now, and why I said that when the inflation price will go down because of the food price may. Right now, we have farmers in my constituency, and I'm sure the member from Southeast, St. Elizabeth, is feeling the same, and South Manchester. Carrot prices, farmers are getting between $15 and $20 a pound now. Right? In the market, it is between $80 and $100. But there's a glut on the market that, well, thank God that this time, vendors are basically dictating the prices to the farmers, and the farmers can be able to offload most of the crop. But in the past, they would have to be feeding it to pigs. So the farmers themselves get hurt. So even though the trajectory of the price, and that's why I come back to the point of proper policy and planning in crop rotation, in the various market forces that drive it. Because we always judge the growth of agriculture coming from probably a 15-20% growth, but then you have a drought or flood. It drops, but then we say it is growing, but it is only growing from a low number. It's not growing from the high number that it was coming from. Yeah? It is a recovery growth and not real growth in the industry. Yeah? Now, come back to credit and the discussion on interest rates and access to credit to farmers. A farmer who has 3 acres, but would like to put in a crop I'll give you an example of a farmer in St. Elizabeth the other day, and I was visiting my colleague's constituency, and I'm on a farm, a farmer planting tomatoes. And he said to me that for him, the price, when he was a young boy, the price for tomato was $20. But the price for a bag of fertilizer was $500. But the price for tomato today is the same $20. But he's paying $5,000 for the same bag of fertilizer. And his yield is not much greater than it was before. But the market has expanded, so he's selling a little more. If it is that we want to see the growth, as I'm saying, and I speak of my own, and the access to capital, because it is $5,000 for a bag of what? How much for a bag of Irish potato seed? They're $10,000 for a bag.
Thereabout.
But a farmer who would want to plant can't afford the capital outlay out of his pocket for that. And the lack of access to capital, especially for small and medium-sized farmers, is a big thing. It is. And if you come into my constituency and you see, I said the best businessman out there is a farmer, because he deals with cash most of the times, because the higglers come to the farm gate, buy, You know, so many times they can't even recover because in a glut like this, in many times they don't even get the cash up front. It's until the higgler sells the produce, then they pay them. And if they have to throw it away, then there's nothing, and he gets hurt. Then he comes to our constituency office, and God bless if we can give him £0.5 pound of seed and 2 bags of a 50-pound bag of fertilizer to put him back on his feet. But it's a recycle, is that yeah? And I don't get the impression, despite which government isn't, that we do enough on the policy side to drive the growth of agriculture. We speak about it, but do we actually put it into play for the smaller farmers? And if it is that we're going to grow agriculture also, the agri-parks, in my estimation, was a great idea because it allowed infrastructure, control. You had guidance from the Ministry of Agriculture to help with the yield. That would help. That when you have a drought in a St. Elizabeth or a Manchester, the agri-parks would be in full production to help to keep your decline in production to a minimum. But you know, and the question is, when you're doing your forecasts, does policy is it a greater part of that forecast for agriculture than just looking at this is what we have been doing over the last 2 years, and we're expecting, the weather services say we're looking at 15 storms names this year, you know, to drive that forecast?
All right, thank you very much, member, for the question. And you've, I think, well articulated a lot of the characteristics of the sector, agriculture. The agricultural sector has been a significant feature in the Jamaican landscape for, obviously, for a long time. And so your question of does policy inform when we are doing a forecast? It does. It speaks to, we are in close touch with the stakeholders in each industry as we derive information and data on which we base our projections. And if someone says, for example, in the mining industry, we expect to get a 300% increase in production, then it has to be predicated on something. I notice the mic goes in and out, right? It sounds like it's just me, but maybe. Yeah, and so similarly in agriculture, if certain subsector groups, citrus growers, citrus farmers, if the poultry industry, you know, based on development and policy, the policy environment and framework does a lot to inform the forecast. So if you have a packaging house being established for pepper mash facilities, if you have a pepper mash facility being undertaken in a PPP framework with the private sector, that may augur well for increased output of pepper mash. When you speak of import substitution, you look at the domestic policy framework that will facilitate the types of production that you anticipate. So yes, it does factor in a strong way, and a lot of, for a long time, and I was very close, as you know, worked in the sector, and a lot of the challenges you've articulated over a number of years, and we've seen initiatives, some not sustained, some now emerging, to really address some of the issues that have been long-standing, and with varying degrees of success. So since we've been, certainly since I've been at the PIOJ, we've had meeting with the agricultural sector, some of the stakeholders, and they articulated that a primary concern for them was irrigation, and in terms of public investment, we've since seen the approval of irrigation projects aimed at trying to alleviate some of those concerns in the sector. A lot of the articulation around climate smart agriculture is in recognition of the susceptibility of the sector to those climate impacts. And when you speak of protected agriculture, if it's greenhouse technologies that's not new, that's been going around. So these are issues. There have been many studies. You said there are not much studies. I think there have been many studies just articulating and the findings suggesting responses to increased marketing. Some of the practices of the sector where farmers would grow and then try to find a market. Studies are showing that if you would first secure and identify the specific type of demand and what forms and modalities that would take, that would help. So there are quite a bit in terms of prey. Largely we know initiatives around combating that. We speak of linkages, and over some time you're seeing now just a more deliberate, I think, maybe reporting on the work, because for a long time people have been saying, well, you need to strengthen linkages with the sector, with tourism and manufacturing. So to answer your question easily, yes, the policy framework does inform, but there's a general challenge even in identifying the concerns. You say we thought for a while as a country that if we could harness greater private sector lending to the sector, to agriculture, and realize that best practice suggests you need another modality than your commercial banking system, because there was a reluctance to undertake the type of risk to make it affordable in terms of the lending to the sector. So you look at the development banking structure, you look at you speak of strengthening extension services, and we realize in terms of that planting support to the farmer, very important, because they don't have the capacity otherwise. Most of our farmers, the characteristic of Jamaican farming, most of them are small farmers that don't have that capacity. They don't have titles for the land, they don't have the acreage, they don't have, to secure lending. So you have to find those modalities. So you're right. Remember, it is as much a part of the policy framework and the types of initiatives employed as it is trying, to build that resilience, is as much a part of that, those activities, as it is just saying how do we mitigate against weather. So you're right, as Governor spoke about some of the small businesses and them trying to access lending, we found that when he made pools of funds available to micro and small enterprises, a lot of times monies were left on the table because people couldn't access, even though monies were made available, people couldn't take up the money because they lacked capacity, whether in terms of business acumen, know-how, poor planning, etc. And so we know it's a composite, and it's good to know that as a policy maker, you're and representing a constituency, you're seized that and saying, but this is much a part of what we do as government, what we do in terms of in leadership to try to address these issues than just simply, as you know, and your constituents will tell you, just being susceptible to the weather.
All right. Member Jackson?
Mr. Chairman, I must say I felt a little bit distressed, because when the BOJ, the PIOJ, and the ministry comes, in great part you report what has happened and you report what you expect to happen. And the question I asked a moment ago about policy advising or influencing the projections you make. And the question in my mind, as analysts, as researchers, do you use the information to impact not just policy affecting you, but you impact on policy based upon what the data reveals to you? And a couple of things. I have a question for PIOJ and one for Governor. The mining sector. Much has been said about the projection. Now, mining, bauxite, alumina sector is a major part of our growth projections. The recent situation regarding Rusal that you made mention of, and the impending or pending actions in October. Has the PIOJ made any quantitative assessment of the impact on our economy, on the sector, and on the economy? Yes, as the PIOJ or the BOJ made any quantitative assessment of what the impact would be. And the reason why I ask that, because we have to be proactive. We can't wait. We are in May now. We know about this from last month when the announcements were made. We can't wait until the end of October, November. Then we begin to report on what the impact has been, rather than make the assessment of what it is likely to be to inform on any proactive intervention to avert that from happening. For example, because of the impact from where I am as a layperson, it would be on our economy. And we see after 2007, 2008, when the industry went down, we create some ghost towns around the place. Your area would have been affected by the downturn in the sector. We never had any control over that. But to the extent that we as a country can seek to avert that, so that our Prime Minister, our Minister of Foreign Affairs and what, begin to engage, because this is now not a natural disaster, you know. It would have been a man-made disaster in the sense that it is policy decision taken elsewhere that would impact on us. And therefore, we have a responsibility as a government to seek to mitigate those impacts on us. But what the impact would be, personally, I don't have a clue in terms of the quantitative impact. So not until we begin to quantify it before we can have a better appreciation of what the consequences would be. Hope it would be not major, but based on previous experience is a concern of mine. So that is one for me. The other for you, PIOJ, I just put the other one on the table. Governor, much been talk about interest rate and the banking sector. You mentioned in your report, Governor, about the fall off in non-performing loans. So there have been an improvement in the performance in the banking sector, which is good. 2 point something you mentioned it was. One of the major concerns of the business sector, particularly for the micro and medium small business sector, is access to financing and the cost of financing. We all know that it is easier to walk into a bank and get a loan for a car than to get a loan for any business activity, a machine or